read a column on CBSSports.com earlier this week by their national college football reporter who was at Jim Harbaugh's satellite camp in Baltimore, Maryland, one of the many satellite camps that has caused such a furor across the college football landscape, certainly in SEC country. John Solomon wrote that column, and he joins me right here now live on The Rich Eisen Show. Thanks for calling in, John.
Sure, thanks for having me, Rich.
You bet. Describe that scene for me, the Harbaugh camp that you were at.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to see what's it like for myself, because you hear so many things about it, particularly from SEC country. It's a lot of football, for a couple hours, a lot of coaching players up, a lot of fundamentals. There is, of course, some eyeing of prospects, that there's a recruiting element to this, that there's no doubt about that. And it's Jim Harbaugh really getting his brand and his name out there to the point that people keep talking about it.
So there were really Big Ten level athletes that were brought into this camp that has a possibility for Michigan to be looking at to recruit?
Yeah, there are some. I mean, a handful. Granted, this is Maryland. It's not necessarily the biggest hotbed of football talent, but there actually was a player from Texas who's ranked, I think, the top 10 quarterback. He's in the 2018 class. He's looking at transferring to a school in Maryland, and he was at this camp, came to Maryland for this camp, and also to check out the school. And a lot of people were keeping an eye on him.
So what were the, I guess then, describe the majority of the players who were there at this camp then?
I mean, talking to some people who are a little bit more in tune with recruiting than I am, they said, some of these guys are all-star caliber players like at high schools. Others are just guys who play high school, and some of them are younger, some of them are older. There is some talent. There's others who just want to try to get some exposure. One interesting case was Joe Gibbs' grandson was there, came from Charlotte, flew on his grandfather's jet to come to this because he's entering his senior year, doesn't have any scholarship offers yet. He's going to be going to Maryland's camp, Virginia's camp, and this is a chance for him to get some exposure and to get seen. John
Solomon of CBSSports.com, national college football reporter there, joining me here on The Rich Eisen Show. So if you had to describe this camp, what would you say its main purpose was for, John?
I'd say a couple things. One is getting the Michigan brand out there. I mean, it's clearly that there's that element to it. I mean, you don't go to 40 different places or so around the country if you're not trying to get the Michigan name out there. And it's a creative approach by Jim Harbaugh. And second, though, it is also sort of, I think, giving back to football and pumping things up, pumping the sport up, trying to provide some opportunities, provide some exposure. So it's a combination of both. The people who are critical and say this is just recruiting that shouldn't be going on. There are some recruiting elements to it, but you go to it, it's a lot of coaching.
John Solomon joining me here on The Rich Eisen Show. So how'd you find Harbaugh? What mood did you find him in, John?
He's in a pretty good mood. He's enthusiastic. He's throwing passes. He's coaching them up. He got a little defensive and upset when I pointed out to him that, he was taking some pictures with some recruits, and he had told me earlier in the day he wasn't supposed to be doing that, and Michigan had put out a tweet saying they're not allowed to do that per NCAA rules. These are kind of how silly NCAA rules are. So he took a little offense to that, but that's sort of how Jim Harbaugh is he will push the envelope and try to be as creative as possible.
Is that when he called you a cheap shot bastard, John?
That is what he wondered, if I am a cheap shot bastard. That's correct.
Have you ever been called that by a coach or anybody in your life, John?
I have not, but it was an interesting one. It was an interesting turn of phrase.
So do you understand why there's such a furor based or an air of negativity around all of this?
No, not really. I've always kind of thought it was sort of much ado about nothing. I can understand a little bit of the concerns about let's try to regulate this, make sure we're within the NCAA certain rules and guidelines for recruiting, contact, and that kind of stuff. It's a lot of minutia stuff, but for coaches it's a big deal because they feel like they're at a competitive disadvantage. But at the end of the day, I don't know that this is necessarily a huge advantage for Michigan, and I don't know that it's a huge disadvantage if you don't do it as often or you don't do it at all. Michigan actually had a case last year. They took a player from one of these camps who was in Florida. He was committed for a while, several months. He ended up being dropped near the very end because they had too many guys who were going to be signing with him, and that became a little bit of a PR disaster for Harbaugh. So it can come back and bite you, too.
John Solomon from CBSSports.com joining me here. So tell me about this column you wrote today about the SEC and how there's all sorts of conversation going on technology-wise that some teams might be able to look at some videos during the game in their locker room. Is that what's happening, right?
Yeah, come 2017, the NCAA was going to allow it this year. It got put on hold to try to work out some of the logistics. And come 2017, you're going to be allowed to have electronic devices, coaches will, up in the press box, talking about tablets, laptop computers, and also in the locker room. So it can potentially be sort of a game changer for coaches because you can use it to teach, the players in the locker room there at halftime. There's going to have to be some guidelines figuring out, okay, can you go into the locker room like during the game and go look at it? Because they're not allowing it on the sidelines, just in the locker room in the coach's box. So there's still some questions to work through, but there are a lot of coaches who want this more technology. We already see a lot of more technology in the NFL. It's even in the high school ranks, and college football has just been really slow adapting to it.
John Solomon joining me here on the Rich Eisen Show at John Solomon CBS. As you can hear, we have a fire alarm going on in the Rich Eisen Show studio right now, John. I think it's the SEC that would like us to stop talking about the Harbaugh camp, quite frankly, if I had to guess on it.
You could be right.
John, thanks for the time, and I appreciate your thoughts on the subject, okay?
Sure, thanks for having me, Rich.
You bet. That's John Solomon of CBSSports.com. The self-destruct sequence, is that what's happening here?
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.